Okay, so tonight we begin covering the material from the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. This is a favorite book of mine, and the difficult thing, I will tell you up front, is that we've got 12 weeks to cover the whole book. There's certainly more than 12 weeks worth of material there. You always have the difficulty as a teacher of either giving yourself the amount of time that you want, which means everybody falls asleep, or you put yourself in kind of a crunch, and we don't get to cover necessarily as much as what I would like to, but we get through the material at a level that I think is valuable to people. So we chose for that. We're doing it in one quarter. There's about 15 chapters in the book. The average reading will be one chapter. Now, I will tell you, and I recognize this is probably more reading than you normally have for a Wednesday Bible class. If you do not do the reading or do not have opportunity to, I don't want you to think, well, I just won't even come to class. Now, definitely still come. There will still be valuable things to it. If you didn't get a chance, for example, to read chapter 1 for this week, that's okay. One, you can catch up. Two, we're going to cover a lot of the highlights of it here in class tonight. And I think you'll still find value in it. But I will also tell you, the flip side of that is if you take the time to do the reading, I think you will find that you get much more out of the class. You will get a higher level of value out of it if you do the reading. The other reason that we're doing this class, and I might want to say thank you to the elders here, because it was a fairly big ticket item to buy a bunch of these books. We got a good discount because we bought a whole bunch of it at once, but to buy a whole book for everybody is a choice. And the reason that I really asked for it is because this is a good reference book. What we're talking about here is the issue of apologetics. How do you have discussions with other people about why you believe what you do? And Peter tells us to be ready to give a defense for the hope that is within us. And I think one aspect of that is being able to explain to somebody, how did you get to the point of following the Bible in the first place? We really aren't going to be talking too much about what the Bible itself says. We're talking about things leading up to following the Bible. Namely, how do I have confidence there is a God? And then how do I have confidence that the Bible was written by God and could only be written by God? Having answers for that, I think, is vital, especially as a culture becomes more and more irreligious. You will find, I think, over the course of the next 10 years of your life, that you will be talking to more and more people who just simply do not believe in God, or are not convinced. They might even put it this way: well, I think there's a God. But there is enough doubt in their mind that they never get going. You may have noticed as you read through your Bible that God asks you to do some pretty tough things. And if I'm not convicted that He is, and that He wrote this book, and then I read in the Bible things that are hard to do, and I don't have that conviction there, guess what I'm not going to do? I'm not going to do it, right? I mean, Jesus says things like, take up your cross and follow after me. That is hard stuff. The first shall be last, the last shall be first. All of these sorts of things that the Bible commands us to do. If I don't have confidence, if I think there's a God versus I know there's a God, you will find there is a lack of obedience. And what I think you're seeing in the culture around us now, and will only increase over the course of the next 10 years as one generation gives way to another, is that lack of conviction will exponentially grow. You're going to have more conversations with people who either openly just do not believe in God, or are not convicted that there is a God because they've not heard any evidence that there is. So the goal of this class is to help you with that. And so as we go through it, that's what we have in mind. And like I said, if you get a chance to do the reading, I do think it will be beneficial for you. We're focusing on the material in chapter 1 tonight, which is really how do we handle truth and the subject of truth in the first place. One of the first questions that is asked in the book is why do we demand truth in everything but morality and religion? In life, truth it's not a religious thing. See, this is one of the things that we've done as a society, and the devil's very good at it, is getting you to segment your mind and your life. There are religious things, and then there's life things. And so we care deeply about truth in other areas, but when it comes to religion, we don't expect truth, and we don't even think it's necessary, or we say things like, I follow my truth, or it's true for me, where you would never do that if you were dealing with engineering. In other words, in real life, truth matters. There are some examples he gave in the book. What are some examples that people can think of where truth matters in everyday life and there are consequences if we don't acknowledge it? Taxes, yes. That's an interesting example you give because I had a guy who came to the conclusion, he goes, I think taxes are a social construct, which I guess it is a social construct. They constructed it, but you need to pay it. Yeah, so, I just feel like I don't need to pay any taxes. For me, the truth is zero. And, right? That doesn't work. Any other examples? Gravity. Yeah. If you don't understand the gravity of the situation, don't worry. It'll hit you at the end. Absolutely. Gravity is a truth, and we don't ignore it. Any others? Yeah, there you go. The truth is your boss told you to do it this way, or they told you to show up at this time, and you say, well, 8 a.m. feels not important to me. I'm going to try noon. See how that works, right? Yes. Mathematics, yes. As the son of math teachers, I will tell you, they care. Yeah, it matters, and it especially matters when you begin to apply those mathematics to, like, say, rocket science. They call it rocket science for a reason. They're going to launch stuff with explosives, and you care. You care about whether you got the math right. So you get the idea. In normal life, we understand the importance of truth. But then when it comes to issues of morality and religion, we throw that out the window. And society has done this. I am convinced it's just simply the devil. The devil has, in a very sneaky, devious way, gotten us to think that in issues of morality, the rules of truth and right and wrong that we apply to physics, that we apply to taxes, that we apply to everything else in life, do not apply. So when it comes to right and wrong, it's right for me or it's right for you. It's wrong for me or it's wrong for you. But how dare I impose my truth on you? Because if I do that, right, if all of a sudden I impose my truth on Theron, I tell him this is right or this is wrong, then all of a sudden I have become a narrow-minded bigot, haven't I? And how dare you say that to somebody who has a different life experience than you, or somebody who has a different color skin than you, or somebody who has a different age than you, and we can all give all the reasons why that's not fair. And the reason we can give those reasons is because the culture has taught us that. And so we apply a different standard in morality and religion. One of the things that the book brings up, he says, we love the truth when it enlightens us, but we hate it when it convicts us. And I think that that's a fair point. Why is it that we have such a hard time with something like baptism? I'm convinced when you're talking to people about the issue of baptism, the issue is not the amount of scriptures and that it's a difficult subject. Right? How many verses are there on baptism? Anybody know? 1, 2, 3. So you start counting them up. Theron's over here using his fingers. He ran out of fingers, so we're past 10, right? Dozens and dozens and dozens in the New Testament of direct commands, of examples that very clearly state baptism is a necessary thing. So far as to say, if you are worried, is it really clear? You go to 1 Peter and he says, baptism saves you, right? So it's not a difficult command. So why do we have a problem with it? It's because it convicts you. Because it requires you to do something. You ever think about the fact that baptism is the first actual action that somebody has to do in the conversion process? Everything else you can do from your seat. Right, up until that point, as you're talking with somebody, it can all be an intellectual exercise. Okay, I can buy into this idea there's a God. I can buy into the idea that there's this New Testament. I should do something about it. I can buy into this idea there being right and wrong and heaven and hell and all that sort of stuff. But baptism is the first thing where it's like, are you going to do something about it or not? The first time you run into that. And I think that's why that crossroads happens there. So the problem that we run into with society is that society does not like truth when it convicts us. And I also don't think that that's just everybody else, by the way. We should be honest with ourselves. How many of us like to know when we did something wrong? Right? Raise your hand if you've ever reacted poorly to somebody pointing out a flaw. If you did not raise your hand, you're not being honest with yourself. Right? I mean, it's just normal. We don't like critique. I don't like somebody else pointing out the flaws in my life. And the scriptures do that. Peter, Acts chapter 2, he stands up with the rest of the apostles. They preach the lesson. And at the end of the lesson, what does it say happened to the people who listened? Pierced to the heart. They were cut by it. I might direct your attention, if you look at Acts 2, also look at Acts 7, where Stephen spoke. And at the end of that, it says they were pierced to the heart too. Now, in Acts 2, they were pierced to the heart, and they said, men and brethren, what shall we do? Right? They were convicted, and they said, what do we do? And then Peter says, repent and be baptized. In Acts 7, they are cut to the heart after all the things that Stephen says. And it says they plugged their ears and they gnashed their teeth and they picked up stones and they murdered him. It is the heart of the gospel is conviction. The Word of God is living and active and sharper than any two-edged sword. And it's able to pierce between what? Soul and spirit. And discern the thoughts and intentions of the heart. We just don't like that. So, society doesn't like that aspect of truth. We like it in a theoretical sense, but we don't like it in the conviction sense. But we're in the conviction business. Yes? Yeah. And you're absolutely right. If you trace back the issue of whatever you want to believe is right for you and whatever I want to believe is right for me, if you trace it back, it didn't begin with the gender as a spectrum argument, right? It began with the religious denominationalism movement where, well, we've got one Bible and it says one church and it says one faith and it says one baptism, but I just feel like that's very rigid. So you do what's good for you and you interpret what's good for you, and I'll interpret what's good for me, and then we'll all sing Kumbaya. So yeah, I absolutely agree that you can trace it back to religious roots, which also tells you maybe there was a pretty good reason why Jesus spent so much of his time dealing with false religious teachers versus the full-on pagans. If you, that's where it starts. It's the doctrines of demons, to quote Paul on that subject. Okay, does anybody have any other comments or anything before we move forward a little bit? Okay, so there's 4 that we're going to deal with in the first couple of chapters here. We'll focus on the first 2 tonight. What is truth? You have probably heard that question before in your Bible. Who asked it? What? Pilate. That's right. Pilate asked it. Pilate asked this existential question. And by the way, if you were in a modern higher education environment and asked the question, you stand up in an auditorium class with all of these people getting their masters or PhDs or something like that and ask the question, what is truth? How would people generally respond to a question like that? What would they think of you for asking that in a current higher education environment? Well, that's true, right? Yeah. Okay, and I think you bring up a really good point, which, so I don't know if you ever heard Steve, it depends on what class you're in, and I agree with that, because, and it kind of gets back to that first part, which is we accept truth as a standard in some areas, but not in others. If you're in a philosophy class, they're going to go, wow, what a deep thought, right? Wow, you're a deep thinker. If you're in a physics class, they're going to say, good luck with that. that cannonball's going to hit you, man. And it does. It depends on what environment you're in, and I think it's because that problem we have is continuing to grow. Pilate asked a question that's always been around, and the more that a culture becomes pantheistic in its way of thinking, the more that we accept the idea of there being a multitude of gods, a multitude of religions, and they're all okay, a multitude of philosophies, the more acceptable that question becomes. And if you go back to Pilate, what was the world that Pilate lived in? He is not monotheistic, is he? He's one of these guys in the idolatrous world where there's all these different gods, and you choose the one that you want, and one says this and the other says that, and it's just, we just accept that they contradict, but they can coexist. And so that question is not a new one. Yes? So there you go. Right. Yeah. And this is part of the world that we're living in, is the definition of critical thinking is being messed with, right? So as we look at this idea of what is truth, the next question is, can truth be known? And with that idea of can truth be known, it ties really well to truth, because some people say, well, yeah, there is a truth, but there's no way of knowing it. It really is ultimately the difference between an atheist and an agnostic. An atheist says, I know there is no God. An agnostic says, I can't know whether there's a God. In other words, it may be true that God exists, but there's no way for me to know that. And we'll talk more next week in particular about this idea that a lot of what you will find is that people are taught that your perception is your reality. But as we all know, if truth is just my perception, guess what? My perception right now is this way, yours is this way, and everybody's is a little bit different. You had 3 witnesses to a car crash. Everybody saw a little bit different. And using that logic, there's 3 different car accidents that happened. But the reality is you had 3 different perceptions of one car crash. So is there a truth about the car crash? Yeah, I may only have part of it, and you may only have part of it, and you may only have part of it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And it doesn't mean it can't be found out. In fact, that's somebody's job, isn't it? To figure out what happened with the car accident. And if it's not the police, it's certainly the insurance guys are going to figure it out. So that's the second question we have to deal with, is that people more and more are being taught that truth cannot be known. The common analogy that's used for that you will often hear is the one of the elephant. And you have different people touching different parts of the elephant, and they're all blind, and so one guy touches the trunk, and after touching the trunk, he says it's a snake. And another one touches the side of the elephant, and he says it's a wall, and so on and so forth through the different parts of the elephant. And they say, well, see, that's just life. You can't ever know the truth. But the problem is, with that analogy that's used of all these blind people touching different parts of the elephant, they're all discussing whether it's a snake or a wall or whatever, but guess what? What is it? It's an elephant. And if I say it's a snake, that may be my best guess based off of the information I have, but it doesn't mean that it is a snake. So then the third one with that is, can truths about God be known? People may agree that you can know some truth, but you can't know divine truth. And then the last one is, who cares about truth? Why should I ever care about it whatsoever? The first 2 we'll deal with more today. The next 2 probably more next week. Truth is that which describes an actual state of affairs. Okay, so that's the working definition we're going to use for truth. There are multiple ways of describing it, but I like this definition. It's one that the book uses, that which describes an actual state of affairs, right? It is the way things actually are, which, if you've ever had a disagreement with somebody, and then partway through that disagreement, when you had been so vehemently sure that you were right, and then somewhere in the middle of that discussion, it hits you that what they are saying makes a lot of sense, and all of a sudden you realize that their position is actually better than your position, but you've dug yourself into the trenches at this point. Right? I've bought so deeply into my position, I've fortified it, and I've got the Gatling guns out and the concertina wire, but now I realize that I've got the low ground, not the high ground. You know the feeling when truth is describing the actual events and not what you want. This is the problem with truth. It doesn't care about your feelings at all. What are some areas where we find truth describing an actual state of affairs, but it conflicts with how we would like for it to be? What are some examples of that in normal life that we have to deal with? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I've never thought of it that way because that didn't actually happen. Yeah, right. No, it's true. History's real, right? It's true. It actually happened. And where it actually gets messy with history especially is we tend to lionize or demonize certain people in history, right? But the problem is, and this is one of the beauties of the Bible, this is one of the reasons I think you can find confidence that the Bible is a book that God wrote, not man wrote. David's a hero in the Bible, right? So he never did anything wrong. Always just nailed it, got it squared away. He's a hero in every moment of his life, and you could just love everything about him. Like his life is messy, isn't it? And David's not the only example of that. Other than Jesus, can you show me somebody who isn't messy a little bit? Joseph? Okay, so Joseph, we can argue Joseph, at least, we don't seem to see a whole lot of problems there. Daniel kind of fits in that category a little bit, right? It's hard to find anything flawed with Daniel. But keep going. Who? Job. Okay. Even Job said, I repent in dust and ashes, though. I'm going to argue just a little bit with you, right? Just a little bit. But, I mean, overall, hey, I would, if I could have a Job life, I'd take it. Don't get me wrong, he's still way above Scott Beyer. But you see the problem, we sit here and we start trying to list the people that the Bible pretty much says nailed it, and it's few, right? It's not many. But now if I ask you the question, how many people are counted as people of faith in the Bible but clearly made mistakes? Now start listing people for me. Peter, Paul, Mary. Yeah. I see what you just did there to me. That's a dirty trick, Pam. Wow. I'm in this habit of trying to repeat things for the live stream, and you just got me to list a band. I see how it is. So you get the idea. Class closed now. Truth is messy. Yep. Right. Yep. And it is a tendency of human beings because we're selfish, right? We want it to look the way we want it to look. But history is what history actually was, not just what the winners want to write. People in the Bible were imperfect people, even though it makes it uncomfortable sometimes to realize that people that we follow were let's be honest, especially with someone like David. After what David did, how many of us would want to even hang out with him? You know, I mean, we have to be honest about some of that stuff. Those are truths that are uncomfortable, but they're also absolute. So all truth claims are absolute, they're narrow, and they're exclusive. Meaning, by its very nature, truth requires us to pick a path that excludes everything else. Jesus is a perfect example of this. Today, people like to talk about Jesus as a good person. Like, even if I don't follow Jesus, I think he was a good guy. If you met a guy who was going around trying to convince everybody that he was the Son of God and he wasn't actually the Son of God, would you think he's a good guy? That's not a good guy. It's just talking to somebody last night, and we were talking about Seattle because I'm from that area, and they had been there, and he said, yeah, I went to Pike Place, and a guy stood up in the middle of Pike Place and screamed, some vagrant hobo guy, and screamed, I am goddess, and just screamed it at the top of his lungs. Do you think that that is a good person or somebody who's mentally unstable? Right? So here's the thing. Jesus made claims. You may have heard the term before. I think C.S. Lewis is the one who coined it, Lord, liar, or lunatic. Right? Jesus either is telling the truth, he is the Son of God, or he's a liar, which means you don't like him, because he's a wicked, wicked person. Or he's a lunatic, which means you can feel bad for him, but you certainly wouldn't follow him. But truth claims require exclusivity. And so these are problems that truth brings to the table that we have to deal with, and that people typically do not like to deal with. Some other things to think about with truth. Truth is discovered, it's not invented. So you invent the light bulb, right? So Edison invents the light bulb, but he did it by discovering certain materials that when you put electricity through them will shine. Do you see the difference between the two? He invented the light bulb, but he did it by discovering certain materials that when you put electricity through them, they will shine. Those already existed. Right? People discovered gravity. Einstein discovers the speed of light, or E equals mc squared, right? These things already were. We don't make them. Inventions are made by people. And if your religion is invented, you don't want to be a part of it. You want to become a part of a group of people who are following the truth of God that's been discovered. They didn't invent it. But realistically, how many people are, when they look at religion and all the different options out there, think of it in terms of religions that are invented and made by men? There's a reason we've come to this conclusion as a society of just kind of casting off religion as a social construct. Because a lot of it is. A lot of it was invented because somebody wanted things this way or somebody wanted things that way. And so they just argued and bickered, and then they said, we'll go and do it this way and we'll do it this way. They weren't talking about what is truth. They're talking about what do we want. And it's always been that way. But real truth is discovered. It's not invented. Truth is it's for all people. It's timeless. It should fit in all cultures. You shouldn't say, if it's true, it's not just true for me, or it's not just true in 2021. It's always been true. It always will be true. It is true. You take 2 plus 2 equals 4. You go back to the math, right? That works in 2021, but it also worked in 1721, right? It just is. And it doesn't matter what culture I'm in or what my skin color is or what my background is. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Another one that the book discusses is that truth is unchanging, even if our beliefs about truth change. The example they use is people used to think the earth was flat. Right? So for a very long time, people thought the earth was flat. Not quite as long as sometimes we say that people thought it. They didn't think it quite as that long. But there was definitely a time where people thought it was flat. And then crazy thing happened in the middle of a pandemic. People started thinking it was flat again. But how long was the earth actually flat? Never, right? What if we all polled everybody and we convinced everybody on the planet that the earth is flat? Like, what if we could just slowly but surely, we make it our goal to train everybody to think that the earth is flat. So we get 100% consensus. What is the earth? Still round. That's truth. It doesn't care. It's not, you don't vote on it. You don't decide which, based off of popularity. it doesn't matter what we think about it. Which goes to the next one, which is that truth is unaffected by belief or attitudes. Right? If I have a hard time accepting truth, that doesn't make it any less true. And I might mention that that is part of the process of dealing with somebody in the apologetics realm, in that realm of discussion over truth. Chances are the truth can be explained to the person faster than they can accept it. You will find that to be true. I'm not going to say 100% of the time because there's always that one guy, but pretty close. The amount of times I think back when somebody would say something to me and I would initially dismiss it because I didn't want to believe it, and then I would go home and I would chew on it and process it, and then I'd come back and it was like, yeah, that makes sense. But it had to work like past my pride and my preconceived beliefs and all that sort of thing. You just have to do that, right? That's why sometimes if you have a disagreement with somebody, you both walk away for a little bit, and then you come back and you can work it out, is because you give yourself some time to work through those things. When you're talking with people, trying to convert them in one sitting is probably not going to be realistic. It does happen on occasion. There are biblical examples of it, right? But even in the case of somebody like, say, the Ethiopian eunuch, who we would say was one sitting, what are the chances there were some other things that happened in the Ethiopian eunuch's life before that chariot ride with Philip? All right? So just understand that it's a process for people to accept truth, but that doesn't change because you're having a hard time accepting it. Once again, it is an absolute thing. Yes? Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. Yep. It is. It absolutely is. I don't know if everybody heard that, but Romans chapter 1 points out that decline of mankind and move away from God always begins with that suppressing of the truth and then exchanging the truth for a lie. And that's what we're talking about. That's why this conversation about is there a God doesn't actually even begin with a conversation about God. It begins with a conversation about truth. Can we agree that there is a right answer to this that is absolute, whether I like it or not? Because we also have to be honest. If tomorrow I woke up and was presented with enough evidence that there is not a God, that we really did come from goo, it is all a spontaneous accident, like all the evidence is there laid down, I would not be comfortable with that. Right? That would be really hard for me to accept. Or if tomorrow, somebody gave me all the information and I found out that Joseph Smith really is a prophet and he did really have golden tablets that were given to him by an angel Moroni. Like, I would have a really hard time with that. I would have a lot of guys in bike helmets that I had some sorries to. I mean, it would be really difficult. Well, if that's true for us, can we also see the point that if somebody is going to come out of irreligion or denominationalism, or out of a world where you do what you want and I'll do what I want, and accept the truth of the Bible, that's going to be a hard journey for them too? Because their whole worldview is changing. But what we're trying to get people to do is to no longer suppress the truth, but have the conversation about it. And because they've been told to exchange it for a lie. Just pick what you want and take it. And who cares whether it's right or wrong? I thought I saw somebody with a hand there for a second. Nope? Okay. We can believe everything is true, but we cannot make everything true. That's a quote from the book that I particularly liked. And this is a little bit where we've gotten with religion, right? Is people believe everything. That doesn't make everything true. Okay, We'll talk a little bit about this. The old Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner cartoon is the basis for a apologetics technique that shows up in the book, and they call it the Roadrunner tactic, which is if a argument is self-defeating, then it's like Wile E. Coyote. You know, he's out there, he's running, and there's no ground underneath him. And so then, you know, in the old cartoon, he's running in the air, and then he looks down and he realizes there's nothing, and there's that pause for a moment, and then and he falls to the ground. That is what we're trying to do with some of the arguments that come up with this belief that whatever you want to believe is okay, or that there is no truth. So one of them that comes up is, there are no absolutes. If somebody says there are no absolutes, guess what kind of a statement that is? Self-defeating, because it's an absolute statement. There are no absolutes. Are you absolutely sure that's true? One of them that we've already talked about is there's no such thing as truth. Or you can't know the truth. You can't know the truth as a statement of truth. Do you understand that logic process? To say you can't know the truth is stating something as a truth. And so an easy way to respond to that is, are you sure that's true? And they bring that up in the book, but I will also tell you I've used that in practical conversations with people. This is not just some theoretical book that sits on a shelf. I've used these techniques myself with conversation with people. And I was talking to a guy who just said, look, truth is whatever you want it to be. And you can believe whatever you want, and whatever truth you want is true, or there's no such thing as one absolute truth. And I would tell him, and I remember when he said that, he says, there's no such thing as one absolute truth. I said, is that one absolutely true? And it hit him. Because people aren't used to somebody challenging these statements. But even the idea of, well, that's true for me. It's a self-defeating argument, right? Yeah. Yes. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and so an interesting area in which this is kind of making a little bit of a comeback is in computer programming. So in computer programming, it requires logic, and a lot of times they'll talk about it as logic gates and different particular processes that you have to use for things. And so I've talked with programmers and said, well, look, if you're programming something, you put in certain inputs, you get certain outputs. And you use that kind of logic, and they realize, well, that's not a man-made idea. That's how that works. Yes? Right. Yep. Right. Yep. Yeah. And I might add, God's the one who invented logic. Right? God's the one who invented a right and a wrong way to think about things and process things. So this is not a man-made idea. And God wrote his word to be understood. And in fact, when Peter says, that the scriptures are not a matter of interpretation. What he's saying is, it's not a matter of one's own interpretation, right? It's not a matter of, well, John reads it one way and I read it another way, so John does what John wants and Scott does what Scott wants. That's not, when Peter says it's not a matter of one's own interpretation, what he's saying is, John could be right, Scott could be right, but we can't both be right, and we might both be wrong even. Right? If you're going to look at an issue of truth, there is a right answer that we're striving for, and the scriptures are clear that that's something each of us has to do, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. A couple of other things, if there really is no truth, then why try to learn anything? And can you imagine a world where sometimes when you pour milk into your cereal, you get delicious breakfast food, and sometimes you pour milk into your cereal and it explodes? That's a world without truth. A world without truth means you cannot count on facts. You can't count on things happening at a certain time. I am out of time, and I know it, so we'll just have to stop there for now. But the ultimate end thing is the question, can all religions be true? And the answer is no, because truth is exclusive. And to not believe in God is also a religious belief. It's a philosophical belief as well. So we will stop there. Thank you all so much for your time. And reading for next week is chapter 2. Reading for next week is chapter 2. I might also mention the worksheets for Sunday morning class are out on the table, as well as more books for this class if you didn't get one yet.